Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today I'd like to continue talking about the Beach Boy album covers. In the first three parts we got up through the release of Pet Sounds. And as we discussed at the time, Pet Sounds certainly musically was a great step forward. However, the album cover left a lot to be desired. Album covers were changing rapidly. They were becoming more art pieces than just advertisements for the contents of the album. The Beach Boys lagged behind a little bit on that. Their album covers up to that point had been basically fun in the sun, the group romping around on the beach, or sailing, or even feeding goats at the San Diego Zoo. Of course, the exceptions to that had been the Little Deuce Coupe album, which featured a stock photo from a drag racing magazine, and Surfing USA, which had featured a stock photo of a surfer from a surfing magazine, and certainly ranks in my mind as the worst Beach Boy album cover of the 60s. Of course, we all know that following Pet Sounds came the ill-fated Smile project. A lot was lost for the Beach Boys when that project was shelved. Not least of all was what could have been their finest album cover. Now we'll talk about the music and we'll talk about Smile in a lot more detail elsewhere. But the album cover, and this is from the 2011 box set of Smile sessions, would have been terrific. Very whimsical, really kind of would have caught the spirit of the music and the spirit of the times. Interestingly and weirdly, the back cover, if you notice, is the touring band. It doesn't include Brian, and for a project that we associate so much with being Brian's project, it's very, very odd to me that he doesn't appear on the outer cover. Now this album would have been a gatefold. This is the gatefold that we got in 2011. Now I'm not sure that this would have been the actual inner sleeve. It's very like the inner sleeve of Sgt. Pepper. This probably would have preceded Sgt. Pepper had it been released when it was originally envisioned. I'm not sure, and maybe somebody can tell me, was this the original inner sleeve, or is this something that was just seemed appropriate in 2011 to be the inner sleeve? It would have, however, come with this booklet, photos of the band and Brian, of course, as individuals, and then more artwork. Now this artwork is by Frank Holmes, who's a friend of Van Dyke Parks, the lyricist for Smile, and it's full of these little visual puns that really capture the spirit of the music and the lyrics. And I think that that's why this is so great. This was conceived clearly as an integral part of the listening experience. This was not some album cover that was meant to be tacked on at the end. This was an integral part of the overall Smile concept. And Frank Holmes was clearly well versed with the material and very well involved with what the project was going to be. And that would have made this a terrific cover. Now, as we know, Brian and the Beach Boys were under tremendous pressure from Capitol Records to get this album completed and out into the shops, and they wanted to get to work on the sleeve so it would be ready to go. Under pressure, Brian gave them this track listing that appears on the back cover. Unsurprisingly, it says, "See label for correct playing order." Not only was Brian undecided on the playing order, he was really undecided on what was going to go on the album, and even which pieces of music were going to be components of which songs. The back cover also includes the credit produced by Brian Wilson, which had appeared on all their albums since Little Deuce Coupe. With the shelving of Smile, that credit was also shelved. You wouldn't see a produced by Brian Wilson credit on a Beach Boy album again until 15 Big Ones 10 years later in 1976. Of course, the Smile album artwork was not seen by the public at large until many years later. What did we get when the Beach Boys finally released an album to the public? Of course, in September 1967, we got Smiley Smile instead of Smile. Now this album cover could be called whimsical, but to sort of paraphrase Nigel Tufnell from Spinal Tap's line about there's a thin line between clever and stupid, I think here there's a thin line between childlike and childish. This album cover, to me, hits the wrong tone. I've seen it misfiled with children's albums in the past, simply because the cover really looks like what a kid's album cover looked like at the time. There's no credit for the artwork, and I haven't been able to find out who provided this artwork, but it obviously is sort of an homage to Henri Rousseau's paintings like The Dream or Equatorial Jungle, very much in that style. The back cover of the Smiley Smile album is also an illustration, which brings me to one of the weirdest things about this album cover. That is that it's the only album cover that I can think of until at least the late 70s by a major act that doesn't feature any illustration or photo of the band anywhere on it. Even the Beatles' White Album, of course, was a white cover in '68, but it had photos of the band on the inner sleeve. Likewise, Let It Bleed by the Rolling Stones has little wooden figures of the band on the front cover, and there's a poster inside that has a photo of the band. This is the only instance I can think of where you don't get to see the band at all. Now, possibly, that's because Brian Wilson looked a lot different by the end of 1967. He'd been through the ringer and it looked it. He'd put on weight, he had stubble. Facial hair was still kind of a suspect thing on a band for teenagers to listen to. The Beatles had their mustaches on the front of Sgt. Pepper, but just earlier in 1967, the Monkees' Headquarters album had been redone to omit a picture of 3 members of the band with beards from the back cover. So that may have something to do with the reason that there is no illustration of the band or no photo of the band on Smiley Smile. Of course, Smiley Smile is a very odd album in a lot of ways. It was not well received by the critics or the public, and the Beach Boys quickly followed up in December of the same year with Wild Honey. Now to me, again, it's an illustrated cover, kind of cartoonish, but to me this ticks the right boxes. It's whimsical, it hits childlike rather than childish. It's based on a stained glass window that Brian Wilson had in his home. Obviously the bee ties in with the track Wild Honey. There are other references to bees on the album. I'm as busy as a bee and Let the Bees Make Honey. It is a cover that looks nice, has good color, and ties in with the lyrical content of the album. On the back cover you get graphics vaguely representing the title as a honeycomb, and you do get pictures of the band, at least individually. Of course, the group's look has changed a lot, particularly Brian, who, as we talked about, is heavier and stubbly, but they're giving us a little glimpse of the new reality of what the Beach Boys look like late in 1967. Early in 1968, Mike Love famously went to Rishikesh, India, where he studied transcendental meditation along with the Beatles. And during that time in India, Paul McCartney had told Mike Love that he thought the Beach Boys ought to pay more attention to their album art. Obviously, that message did not get through, because in June of 1968, they came along with their next album, Friends. This album cover was described by no less than Bruce Johnston as the second worst rock album cover ever made, in his estimation, second only to Pet Sounds. Now, I agree this is a terrible cover. And Friends was an unfortunately timed album. June 17th, '68, it's released. That's less than 10 days after Robert Kennedy's been shot, a little over 2 months since Martin Luther King's been shot. Democratic National Convention is coming the next month. America was not in the mood for a friendly little album. This might have been a nice respite from the trials of the times. It didn't come off that way. It just came off as out of step with the times. The cover is by David McMacken. He was just starting out as an illustrator doing album covers, went on to do better album covers, for example, Frank Zappa's 200 Motels in 1971, Zappa's Overnight Sensation in '73, Cat Stevens' Greatest Hits in 1975, Kansas Leftoverture in 1976, also the Steve Marriott album in '76, Best of Arlo Guthrie in 1977. He also did album covers for Artie Shaw, for AC/DC, and some other people, but those are some of his more well-known works. Anyway, he started out with this thing. The colors are terrible. The illustration is terrible. You see the faces of the Beach Boys, like Mount Rushmore in the center, and then among the clouds surrounding, but it just does not come together, and the color is terrible. This thing looks like it belongs in a bargain bin, and that's where it quickly ended up. The album only went to 126 on the chart. That cover is just a photo of a sunset over the ocean. Very, very disappointing album cover release from the Beach Boys. It's really a shame that Friends bombed so badly, because it's a pretty good album. It was definitely not helped with that album cover. The Beach Boys' fortunes did improve a little bit with the release of the single Do It Again, which became a sizable hit and kind of got them moving again a little bit, increased their fortunes just a little. In February 1969, they released the album featuring that hit single, Do It Again. The album called 2020. And Capitol kind of did better by them on this. They gave them a gatefold sleeve. The cover is a nice photo of the band. That's all I really want out of an album cover, at the very minimum, is a nice photo of the band. Back, you've got the band out of focus playing on the 2020 vision thing. And then on the inside, you get Brian, who does not appear on the front cover, and an eye chart. I don't know why, and maybe somebody can tell me what is the significance of calling this album 2020. I don't get it. It seems kind of random. Maybe there's more to it. I've never been able to figure out what the point of calling this 2020 is. But it's not a bad album cover and not a bad album. They're also no longer dressed in matching outfits. They look a little hipper. They look a little bit more with the times. Capitol was obviously willing to spend a little extra money on this, going with the gatefold. I think the idea that Do It Again was a hit gave them some encouragement. Also, this was not meant to be the last Capitol album. They actually owed one more on their current Capitol contract. And I think Capitol at this point was thinking that maybe the Beach Boys would re-up and re-sign with them. So they might have been sort of, throwing them a bone and doing a goodwill gesture to make the packaging a little more elaborate than the typical Beach Boy album. Things, of course, didn't work out that way for Capitol. In November of '69, the Beach Boys signed a contract with Mo Austin and Warner Reprise Records. We'll talk about the album covers of the early '70s when we do Beach Boy album covers, Part 5. Hope you've enjoyed this. Please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Bye.